welcome to this edition of Trader Talk TV. Today we got Mathieu Roche in the office. Mathieu, thank you for coming in.
Hello, Kieran.
Mathieu's the CEO of ID5, and for those who don't know what ID5 are, they're an important part of the ecosystem right now, helping with the plumbing around identity. And as we know, identity is one of the biggest crises to hit the industry in 20 years, probably. Is that right?
Challenges.
Not crisis, a challenge. So today, Mathieu, you're here to talk about one of your sort of next innovation, your product, because obviously you were on before talking about your solution, but now you've got you've innovated a little bit more, and you've come up with a solution called Universal ID. So let's just talk about the problems that it's addressing for. So obviously we've got a situation right now where we have we're effectively in the new privacy first world. Consent is a priority now for any kind of a audience-based targeting, attribution, measurement, and obviously these are key areas of ad tech, and for marketers very important. So things like frequency capping, particularly in Safari right now, is a bit hard to do. Measurement, which is huge important, attribution, and then basic level targeting. So your product is kind of addressing some of those issues. So talk to me a little bit more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think to illustrate the issues, we really need to kind of go back to the journey of an ad impression in the programmatic ecosystem, right? So, user goes to a website that is ad supported, so has a few placements. Probably uses something like pre-bid for monetization purposes, right? So the pre-bid wrapper will kind of be executed when the page loads, and pre-bid will call a few monetization partners, SSPs, exchanges, who are then going to organize auctions with buyers represented by their DSPs, who will probably rely on some sources of data, data point, maybe data exchanges, right? Linking that to the brand. Right, so we go from publishers to brand through this kind of set of hops, right? Most of those buys will be driven by user level data, whether it's retargeting, audience targeting programs, audience extensions, lookalike modeling, right? This will all rely on individual user data to inform the buys. And so the way this identity layer, those identifiers are working is basically through pre-bid, SSPs have access to the page, so they have access to their own user ID stored on a cookie. Everyone works off of a different user ID, right? So they will retrieve their user ID, and then they will issue this bid request server side, right? So for the DSP to understand the user, it needs to be matched here by the SSP. And in some cases they'll have a match, right? So that SSP will know that this DSP's ID is ABC, but maybe they won't know what this one is. And this SSP might know that, this one is DEF, right? And so like that, you'll have a number of calls that go with or without an identifier, right? So some DSP will know who the user is on the page, some won't, and same from the data point. They'll have some data available for some of those users, but not for all of them, right? And so based on this very simplified workflow here, SSP1 knows that the user has an ID here. They have a match for DSP1 in their match table, so they pass that identifier. The DMP has also an identifier for the DSP, so this DSP is able to bid because he knows who the user is, and he has information about that user, right? And so he'll return a bid to the SSP. Everyone else in this description doesn't know who the user is on page or doesn't have any data point because of matching issues, right? So in the end, you have a poor auction where only one of the four bidder can actually bid, which translates probably into some revenue loss for the publisher and also into missed targeting opportunity for the brand, right? The basic problem here is twofold, really. One is match rate between the SSP and the DSP, which is anywhere around 60 to 80%, okay? Match rate between the data provider, the DMP, and the DSP, anywhere between 14 to 60%. So if you compound that, you have 25 to 50% chances that the DSP will be able to bid on an ad impression, okay? First problem. Second problem, the elephant in the room, all of those user IDs are stored on third-party cookies. And we know that access to the third-party cookies is being restricted by browsers, right?
Yes.
Right now, if you take out Safari traffic, if you take out Firefox traffic, both of them having implemented restrictions, in some cases drastic restriction to access third-party cookie, you're left with maybe 60 to 70% of traffic, which is mostly Chrome traffic, in which you can have access to that. So take 60 to 70% of that, you're down to 15 to 35% of your impressions as a publisher that you can actually monetize, 15 to 35% of the opportunities to reach your audience as a brand that you can actually use, right? So first problem is matching, second problem is third-party cookies. So that's the ecosystem that we have to live with because of the way we identify user today in the ecosystem.
And it's not tenable going forward, as you pointed out.
Because, there's two things, right? This is anti-scalable. Because the more platforms you have, the more complicated it becomes to match, and the more publishers are worried of user experience, the more they want to restrict pixel calls, right? And so you have less bandwidth, more matches to create. This is only going to go down, and this is definitely only going to go down as users are more concerned about privacy, and as browsers take action to limit access to things that they perceive to be evil, such as third-party cookies.
And this 60-70% of Chrome is literally kind of keeping all of this together right now. As I wrote about in a post a couple of weeks ago, this is what's keeping a lot of the ecosystem going because...
Yeah, but not for long.
Exactly, because ITP is coming in Chrome. We don't know when.
We don't know what form of right now. What they've said is that they're going to give more information about what the cookies are and what they're supposed to do, and they're going to ask publishers and platforms to kind of qualify what type of cookie they're using.
Yeah.
But we know that there is scrutiny. We know that the legislator is looking at this space as well, and we know that the way we're working today with kind of identifiers that are out of control isn't sustainable.
No.
For that reason already, but because this is only going to go down in the future.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the issue. That's the setup that we're working with in programmatic, which, as a consequence, if you can use only 30% of your opportunities to reach your audience as a brand, you're probably going to put your money into Google and Facebook because guess what? They don't have to deal with all of this.
Exactly.
Right? So major impact for publishers in terms of how much they can monetize their traffic and their assets. Major impact for brands into how they can utilize this and how they can reach audiences on the premium websites they want to work with, right? And major impact on the ecosystem as a whole because most of the money is going to Google and Facebook instead of being driven there. Right?
Okay.
And all of that is basically based on related to the fact that all of those identifiers, right, are proprietary identifiers. They are all native to those platforms. Everyone speaks a different language. If we want to improve communication in this ecosystem, we need to speak the same language, right? And that's been the journey that ID5 has been going through over the past two and some years, which is how do we build a common language that the entire industry can work with, can use to communicate with each other better, right? So our initial service that you referenced was improving translations, right? First, let's try to make that system work better so that, if we know that if we're able to improve match rates, maybe we can tell this SSP that actually this user is GHI, so that this DSP all of a sudden is able to bid, and then you don't have only one, but you have two SSPs bidding for that impression. So more chances for brands to reach their audience, more chances for publishers to monetize accordingly, right? So step one is how do we build an ecosystem that improves the efficiency of the current setup, right? By doing that, we've built relationship with over 50 or 60 platforms. We've built coverage of 2.5 billion users globally on the ID5 service. So we've built scale, which we can use to kind of say, instead of improving translation between your different languages, we're going to give you a language that you can all speak, right? And that's the universal ID approach. It's how do we go away from all having our own way to identify users to using a shared infrastructure that everyone can leverage so that we can identify users better and we can share information with each other better because we don't have that kind of drop off at every step of the way, right? So that's Universal ID. So Universal ID is basically, we released, the initial implementation is through pre-bid, right? So we release a module, a sub-module in pre-bid that basically taps into the ID5 API and retrieves an identifier, let's call it alpha, that is the ID5 ID for that user, right? That's an open source, free of charge service that's available to all publishers. They turn it on, retrieve alpha, and then make alpha available to everyone. So that alpha can be passed into the entire ecosystem and everyone can start trading information, sharing information with each other based on a common key instead of having to rely on match table, which are, as we saw, less than perfect, right? So by using this universal ID, this shared identifier, you basically get rid of the matching problem because you don't have to match anymore. Everyone speaks the same language. Everyone keys off the same ID, right? So we're taking this 25 to 50 up to 100%, right? So that's the first level of improvement. The second level of improvement is those IDs are stored on third-party cookies because that's the domain they operate from. No SSP, no DSP serves from guardian.co.uk or from Le Monde.fr, right? They serve from their own domain, so their ID is stored in their own domain.
Okay, so let's talk about how you work with publishers, right? So you're activating first-party cookies on page, effectively.
So once we don't have to match cookies across platforms anymore, there's no need for that cookie to be stored on a third-party for that identifier to be stored on a third-party cookie, right? And because we work with publishers, because they activate this through Prebid or through other API directly from the page, they can store that identifier in a first-party cookie here, right? And so it means that this information, this identifier, becomes available to everyone, whatever the browser they use and whatever their approach to third-party cookies. And it's passed here as a variable, right, in the tag. So it doesn't require SSPs or DSPs or anyone to kind of fetch their own identifier. It's being passed to them in the tags as an external ID. So when they have their own, great. They don't have to look this up. But as they have access to their own ID less and less, because of the matching issues, because of the third-party cookies limitation, they'll be able to rely on something that will be there, that will be more stable, that will be widely available. Right, and the availability argument is really the key one here.
And there are some companies that use identity as a competitive advantage. When we were talking about this off camera, we both sort of agreed that identity should not be a competitive advantage. It should be open source and allowed to all different parties access it. So
I think
what's your sense on that?
An SSP's competitive advantage, their secret sauce, is how well they can monetize the publisher's inventory, how well they can manage floor prices, how well they can handle formats and kind of auctions and response time and things like that. A DSP's competitive advantage is its algorithm, bidding strategy, and if they can do intelligent things with the bidding strategy, right? How well they can ingest data. A DMP, a data exchange, unique a value proposition is their understanding of consumers, right? The data they're able to aggregate and how much intelligence they can provide to the brands around consumers. It's not the ability to identify. And the ability to identify should be a commodity. If we want this ecosystem to thrive, identification must be a commodity. That's the only way around. And that's why I don't believe it can be any of those players providing their own identifier will have a conflict of interest. Right? That's why it has to be neutral. That's why it has to be.
As soon as you get media involved in this, it gets all messy.
Of course. Well, it's not necessarily messy by definition, but why would a DSP work with another DSP's identifier, right? They're competitors, right? And they're competing on what their core value is, which is bidding algorithms and access to data and format management and all those things. Not identity. It shouldn't be identity. Identity should be available for everyone if we want to solve these problems, which we need to solve if we want programmatic to thrive and publishers to monetize accordingly and brands to be able to reach their audiences through programmatic channels. Okay,
so this is about the industry. Let's talk about user, right? Because our first consideration should always be about the user now, because we are in a privacy first environment, and rightly so. So let's talk about how your sort of mechanism can work with the consent frameworks, and if we get beyond that and say this, so let's say the ICO and on the all various DPAs said we think that the consent framework's not fit for purpose, that might not happen, maybe it does, but then how do you how does your tool work within that sort of new reality?
This solves the availability problem, right? We make publisher inventory available to brands, we make data available to brands so that they can use programmatic at scale with an identifier that is available everywhere, right? That's the number one benefit of Universal ID. The second benefit, though, is that by having a better control, publisher level control of identifier, we can build a very strong privacy by design system, right? The TCF is a very good standard. It's a way to kind of make sure that we can share information in a standardized way, which is super important for the signals and the preference of the users to be understood by the ecosystem. But it relies on goodwill. It relies on the fact that you sign a document that says yes, I'm going to do what the consent string is telling me to do, but no one knows what's happening in the back kitchen. Right?
Yeah.
By implementing something like Universal ID and by rolling this out across the entire ecosystem, we have a chance to build a very strong privacy by design system. Because guess what? If you don't have access to the identifier, because based on what the transparency and consent framework signal tells us, you're not supposed to use personal data. Well, you don't have access to the identifier, you cannot. Technically, it is impossible to use personal data, right? So we can really ensure that publishers' preferences, users' preferences are very much like technically impossible to go against by building privacy at the heart of the system, which is what we've done. We've built on top of the transparency and consent framework, since the specs have been available, and we ingest consent signal every time we get a call from a publisher. We look at what the consent signal allows us as ID5 to do, allows the partners of the ecosystem to do, and then we process information and we share that identifier accordingly. So it's already something that we've been thinking about for a long time, and I think that now, we can play cat and mouse with the browsers forever, right? But we won't be able to win that war because they have the control of what's going through.
Exactly.
The
they are
right?
the gatekeepers, and
they are the gatekeeper. So what we have to do if we want this kind of war to end is to show them that we're actually doing the good thing, the right thing, by design. Not just because we're saying, we're going to do the good thing because they've seen that movie before and they know it doesn't work, right? We have to build an ecosystem that proves by design that privacy of users and preference of users will be respected. And that system can rely on an identifier because you have a place to kind of control and make sure those wishes, those preferences are respected. And it's the same thing for from a publisher standpoint, right? There's a lot of misuse of data, let's say, in the ecosystem because it's an open ecosystem, which is good in one way, but which is also difficult to navigate, to control, right? You don't know who's listening to the bids that are going out there. Bid listening is still a practice. You don't know who's leveraging data from you because this is like you're opening the doors to your inventory, right? And you can't control, there's no gate. You can't control who's coming in, who's coming out, who has access, who doesn't have access, right? By controlling access to the identifier, by encrypting the identifier, by rotating the encryption key, by making sure that this is kind of built under very strong security rules, we can ensure a lot of data protection capabilities. We can limit the dispersion of personal data. Identifiers are personal data, right? And so the minute you pass an identifier in a bid request, which is what the ICO has been saying, you're basically sharing personal data with a bunch of people. You don't know who they are. You don't know what they're going to do with it, right?
But then you're saying that your tool can evolve with the legislation because we don't know where we're going to end up because the privacy is still being legislated, being brought together at the EU level, and obviously all the DPAs have a specific interpretation of different things. And by the way, the ICO will be at ATS London, so get your tickets for our event in a couple of weeks. But it's important, I guess, to evolve around that because, like, if it comes out, you cannot broadcast. Like, maybe you won't be allowed to broadcast, so there'll be restriction on who you can send that to or who they've opted in. So there'll be an opt-in process here, and that's consent framework to you to work with. So it's important to be able to evolve around that change in legislation.
And I think this is the foundation of a system that can be much more efficient, much more respectful of publishers' data, much more respectful of users' preferences. And that will evolve, right? That will evolve with the guidance, that will evolve with the practices. But this is a very strong foundation. It makes identity much more available, which is important for monetization for publishers, is important for tracking and measurement for brands. It makes identity privacy first, which is super important for users and super important for environment and the ecosystem and the browsers and everything. And it enables for strong data protection mechanism to be implemented as well. And I think this is focus now, right? We need to bring efficiencies. We need to make sure that monetization work better. We need to make sure money comes back from Google and Facebook into this ecosystem, and that will come because we'll be more efficient. You'll be able to reach your brands better. You'll be able to organize more efficient auctions, right? So availability is number one. We need to provide ROI, right? As a company, that's what we're striving for, and this is our focus. But there are a lot of additional benefits that we can build on top of this infrastructure to make the ecosystem work better.
So how does a publisher use your product then? Let's just talk about sort of the early stages. Like, this is obviously the next iteration of what your product was before, but How does a publisher then use the Universal ID?
So it's still fairly new. We announced the release of Universal ID via pre-bid integration late June, right? So it's only been a few weeks, and we've had an amazing amount of requests from publishers. I think there's like over 6,000 or 7,000 publishers already that have activated, turned on the pre-bid adapter to fetch the ID5 ID and pass it, make it available to the ecosystem, right? And it's super simple. I mean, it's just a config option in pre-bid. It's like 2 lines of code that you have to update, and that's it. It's been kind of approved by the prebid.org kind of open source community. It's all very transparent and very open and very easy to integrate. We're building like another API for publishers who are not working with pre-bid or need to have access to the ID5 ID for other purposes, such as feeding their data lake or passing it on to their DMP. And that'll be the same, like similar system, right? An API that taps into the ID5 table and retrieves an ID. So very light, transparent, free of charge integration on the publisher side. Now what we're focused on is making sure that the value chain, the SSPs, the DSPs, the data providers, the data platform, kind of use it, right? And so first step is make it available. Second step will be make sure these guys pass it downstream to the buyers, etc., etc. So we're at the beginning of the story, but the level of interest, the demand, the momentum around this whole vision is huge. And it's been only a few weeks. I'm happy to come back in a few months and tell you where we are. But this is really the vision of what the future of identity for programmatic should be.
Democratizing identity, basically.
Yeah, make it a commodity, make it available for everyone, make it work much better than it's working today, so that we all have a chance at doing our job better and compete against Google and Facebook.
And making more money, which is important. Mathieu will be at ATS London this year. He'll be on the ITV panel, which should be an interesting chat. We've got some good people on that panel. So Mathieu, thanks for coming in to explain that. It looks like an interesting product, and I look forward to the next level of innovation. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time on Trader Talk TV.